Hi, so welcome to AAU Play. I'm Ben Dorfman, Associate Professor for International Studies and the Education, Language, and International Studies at Aalborg University. And one of the things that many people have been thinking very much about over the past several years is the state of American politics. And within that topic, a concern that a lot of people have had is the relationship of the United States with international affairs. And inside of that topic, a significant issue for a lot of people in today's world is how the United States is relating itself to basic human rights standards. This is a topic with a lot of historical meaning, in part because the United States has the unique role of being one of the foundational states in terms of founding a nation based on at least the theoretical idea of people's basic human equality and people's equal right to pursuing life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, as it's phrased in the American Declaration of Independence. But in terms of international relations and in terms of global politics that would seem recognizable for us today, this has had especially a lot of meaning in the 20th century as the United States emerged as a major player on the world stage to a certain degree after the First World War, but then significantly after the Second World War, as the United States was central in terms of organizing the effort of the World War II allies around sets of ideas that had to do with the notion of basic rights and democracy on the global stage, and then also had an important role in the foundation of important leading international human rights organizations such as the United Nations. As the United States moved forward in time and we entered the space of the Cold War, the United States often posed itself as a champion for international democracy. And even though there were a lot of controversial interventions and situations that the United States found itself in and intervened in on the international stage, the Vietnam War would be a primary example. Nonetheless, the vocabulary of democracy and democratic rights globally was important to how the United States advanced itself and how it tried to position itself in world affairs over the Cold War period, playing, for example, an important role in the international affairs vocabularies of presidents like John F. Kennedy and Jimmy Carter. In recent years, we've seen a very complicated relationship in terms of the United States' relationship with international human rights vocabularies, with presidents like Obama and Biden dedicating themselves in a sort of obvious and very forthright way to international standards and making the advancement of civil and political rights the center of some of their foreign policy agendas, while we've seen the two Trump administrations, which have been interspersed between the Obama and Biden administrations, and now we sit in the most recent version of the Trump administration, invoking a kind of national isolationism, invoking a kind of great power politics, and very much emphasizing the full sovereignty of national states or the right of individual nations to make the decisions they want vis-a-vis their own politics and economics, sort of regardless of international standards. When we think about the United States and human rights today, there are a number of issues which often come to mind for many of us or seem to be in the headlines in terms of what we're hearing about the American relationship with basic rights standards. One of the issues concerns affirmative action or DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion initiatives, where there has been a tradition, especially since the administrations of Kennedy and Johnson, of finding modes of compensating for the historical disadvantage of certain minority groups inside the American social spectrum. And this has involved issues like providing bonuses on college applications, social programs designed to advance the cause of underprivileged minorities. And this has gotten something of a backlash in recent years, as many Americans have felt that this has sometimes resulted in a form of reverse discrimination, where we find ourselves engaged in a question as to whether or not equality and democracy and opportunity should be thought of vis-a-vis people's identity and their historical experiences, experiences, or vis-a-vis the notion of an abstract individual where everybody is sort of approached on a kind of blind basis without regard to the question of what their particular historical experiences has been. And at the moment, this is very central to America's culture wars debates, very much dividing the right and left side of the American political spectrum. Another area which has gotten a lot of attention in relation to basic human rights question is the problem of LGBTQ plus rights, where the Obama and Biden administrations attempted to make LGBTQ plus rights a center of both domestic and international policy, trying to pose the United States as an international leader for the cause of queer rights around the world, and where the Trump administration has rolled back very much specific attention on those rights, and especially struggling with the issue of trans rights in terms of suggesting that there is a culturally conservative America, in fact, perhaps even a culturally conservative world, in which it is more the norm to want traditional values as concerns religious beliefs and sexual identities and social roles, as opposed to the more progressive approaches to such issues which had been taken by the Obama and Biden administrations and other progressive governments around the world. Migration is another issue that gains a lot of attention in terms of the United States' current relationship with the human rights question. Of course, the United States historically has had a very sort of up and down relationship with the question of migration and who it lets in and who it wants. But on the other hand, there's often been an image of the United States as the country that welcomes those who have not been welcomed elsewhere or have been persecuted elsewhere, a place where the idea that all people are deserving of equal opportunities is part of the sort of basic set of American values, and that's what one can get by looking to go to the United States as opposed to other parts of the world. And right now there's a big question that surrounds the problem of belonging in American society in terms of whether or not the identity of an American has to do more with their historical relationship with a country over a longer term, or whether one's identity as an American has more to do with whether one signs up to obey a set of civic laws and ideas. A last point that we might think about in terms of one of the questions which is being raised about the United States and its relationship with human rights today has to do with the question of the environment. Many human rights activists are today pointing to the notion of a clean and sustainable environment as a basic human right on par or along the lines of or of the same value as things like the right to free speech or the right to a fair trial. And of course, the Trump administration has made one of its first moves in the two instances of that administration to withdraw from major international climate accords like the Paris Climate Accords, with Trump himself, in fact, having referred to climate change as a hoax in front of, in fact, the United Nations. One of the questions that this raises for many people is how consistent the United States is or has been in relation to its relationship with international human rights standards. Does it see itself as a power that has the right to step in and step out of basic human rights standards sort of whenever it would like? And this is a complex question in a lot of ways because on one hand, the United States has played an important role in forging international alliances central to the defense of democracy on an international basis. NATO would be an example of this. The United States has also historically been highly supportive of the project of the European Union. And again, it's also been enormously central to perhaps the leading international human rights organization in the form of the United Nations, where even under Trump, something that we might point to here, the United States provides 22% of the United Nations budget and 26%, in fact, of its peacekeeping budget around the world. But that is at the same time, though, that the United States has not ratified major international treaties. And we can get a quick look here at major treaties that the United States is a part of and not part of. And among those that we might point to where the United States has not participated in them in the same way as other sort of modern democratic states, we might point to, for example, the International Criminal Court. The United States is now party to this, or the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, another major human rights convention to which the United States is not party. One of the complications with this is the idea that America is a large country. It is a massive democracy, 330 million people, to be 350 million people perhaps within the next decade or so. And one of the questions we need to ask ourselves is whether or not we expect perfection around a particular idea or set of principles when running a democracy of hundreds of millions of people, which involves vast differences of opinion and extremely complex problems, both on domestic and international levels. And what to do when, in fact, there can be parts of populations in democratic societies that can be skeptical of international institutions and international standards. Another point that we might find interesting is that the Trump administration actually suggests that it supports a kind of human rights, and this is the right of nations to go their own ways, and that it emphasizes, when it talks about human rights, issues like religious freedom, where it suggests that, in fact, religious minorities in many states around the world may, in fact, sometimes be suffering a kind of marginalization themselves in terms of the demand that a lot of room get made for religious minorities. And these complex questions are often a difficult part of negotiating the concept of human rights inside the spectrum of larger modern democratic states. One thing we can say is that American elections determine much about the country's relation with basic human rights standards. In the 2020s, many Americans are not voting primarily based on foreign policy issues or the country's relationship with international institutions. That's while the country has put into power two presidential administrations which have been highly supportive of broad international institutions and have sought to advance civil and political rights standards on the global stage. Obviously, different choices have been made in recent years as the country has tended towards a more inward and isolationist focus in terms of the results of the presidential elections which have brought the Trump administration to power. So the question remains is whether or not Americans are going to continue to choose administrations that are skeptical towards international institutions and global rights standards, or at least seek to remake them towards a new definition, or whether or not the United States is going to return towards a more international path represented by figures like Biden or Obama. There are going to be two moments at which we get some firm answers to these questions. One is going to be in the 2026 midterm elections, when Americans vote for a range of congressional seats, which are going to be open for contestation, both in the House and the Senate of the American Congress. And then a more definitive answer is going to come in the 2028 election for the American presidency. There are a number of assignment questions which have been made available to you in relation to this presentation that instructors would be able to take up with students for discussion and for possibility of some essays and writing activities. And we would thank you very much for listening and being with us in this discussion about a major issue vis-a-vis a major international power in relation to one of the leading ideas in international politics over the past century of global history.